Thank you for joining us at the Artist Tree. I'm your host, Lonita Cook. We are welcoming in the studio today three wonderful guys who are not just my friends, but they are writers and members of the fiction writers group at the Writers Place. But before we say hello to them, I want to go ahead and say hello and give a shout out to the two new members of the fiction writers group, Joe and Jennifer, and then our tenured Naomi Shoup, who is a wonderful writer and my most important friend. All right, guys. We'd like to welcome to my right, Kent Babb, who is a journalist for the Kansas City Star. He covers all things NFL and some other topics. Across the aisle, we have Daniel Gooden, who is a fiction writer. He is a dad, and we're going to talk about family and writing with him. And then our esteemed Richard Twillman. All right, guys, let's go ahead and just kind of get started, real casual, about what you do, how you got into writing. Go ahead and start.
Well, started writing when I was a teenager. Just kind of enjoyed writing, the act of it, the art of it, and then went to journalism school at the University of South Carolina, and I got a job at the state newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina, right out of college, and then came to the Kansas City Star in 2007, and I've kind of dabbled in fiction and things like that over time, and hopefully one day I'll be published in that medium.
Nice. And Daniel?
Yeah, I think I didn't really start writing fiction until probably college. I had a community college English teacher that said I was good at it, and I started looking at it, and I'm like, I do that pretty well. So I had a choice between computer science and English, and they said, you've got a lot of math to catch up on in computer science. I'm like,
all right, going to stick with
I'll
the
stick
English
with English, yeah. So
right.
English major at Baker University south of here, and then got out and got a small town newspaper job for a couple of years in
Was
Louisiana.
that in Kansas? Oh,
in Louisiana, outside of New Orleans, and that was pretty fantastic for writing. Just going out and finding stories where you could, and making stories out of people's lives and what they were doing, and so after that, I came back to Kansas City and worked for Ingram's business magazine in town here for a while, and then my wife got a master's degree with library science here for Kent City, Kansas, the main public library here.
You're kind of set then, because the librarian and the bookseller,
yeah, she
the
can do my researching for me, and it's kind of nice. So she works, and I stay home with two boys and write between naps and evenings when it fits in. And
wonderful. Yeah. All right, and Richard.
How to get into it?
How'd you get into it?
I didn't have any choice. I mean, evidently I've got these invisible people behind me that keep whispering in my ear and closing every other door that I've been in down my life, and opening the ones for the writing thing. So it's okay, fine. I finally gave up and started writing. I've always written, but...
What other things did you do? You said that, you've kind of been narrowed into it. What other things?
I've had 40 some odd different jobs, and none of them are the same.
Right.
And none of them, and the thing I've been in, mostly sailing, obviously. But I mean, I've been a production supervisor, I've been a tree trimmer, I've been plant manager, I've done...
You've done it.
I've consulted nuclear power plants. I mean, I've done a lot of different things. So. But the writing is something that always seems like it's there, and it just won't go away until I do it.
And do you also have a degree?
No.
In English?
No.
So we're all here as writers. Some of us publish, some of us not. How has having an education made a difference in the pursuit of writing? And then you can talk about how it hasn't made a difference, or...
Well, I don't know that it has with me. I mean, I think the more you read, I think writing is sort of self-taught. I think you can teach yourself to play guitar or cook, and you can also do that with writing. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those things that you practice it, you hone it, you craft it, and then eventually, hopefully you become good at it. But I think the only way to do that is to read and to write, and the more you do that, hopefully eventually you'll take these incremental steps and become not just competent at it, but good at it. And those that become good at it, I think, have just a really nice, enviable career that I think a lot of people would love to have.
So you don't think that having a degree kind of greases the wheels a little bit? Does it get you in the door? Does it help with networking, building relationships?
Maybe with that and the journalism side, I think maybe that helps to know some of the people. and to understand kind of what some of the shortcuts may be. But in terms of just being a writer, I don't think it helps a whole lot. I think at some places it gives you a bit of a head start, but not. At least in my experience, I didn't find that because I have a journalism degree, that's the reason I'm a journalist or have a job or anything like that. I think it's because I read a lot and I enjoy writing, and and would really like to be good at it.
Right. And so, really, it's the practicing the craft. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best thing about being in college and being in the English department was that you had so many other students focused on the same thing, and the same as we're doing with our writers group now. Our fiction is a group of people that they're all interested in the same focus and are working together in the same direction, and that's done a lot more than reading Moby Dick and a lot of British fiction, which is interesting and nice, but it didn't shape my fiction outside of that I had read it.
Well, I always said that I honestly wish I'd studied English, to improve my writing, because that would have forced me to read more, to read different kinds of things rather than study an AP style book in a journalism class and things like that. I mean, I went to a terrific journalism school, but I mean, there were a handful of classes where I just didn't learn. I didn't feel like I learned a whole lot at all, and so I studied a history minor, and I think that probably helped me as much, just because it opened my mind to different things and different ways of thinking and things like that, compared to the very rigid structure of a journalism degree.
I think a formal education is necessary to get the mechanics of the writing down. What makes a good story, the simple things, the punctuation and all that sort of thing, so that you have the mechanics down. But after that, I think, and I don't mean to denigrate anyone with an MFA, but unless there's passion in the writing, and that's not something you can learn. You have to live that, you have to experience it, and you have to put it on the page. And you want to, you constantly want to get better. And I don't know that a formal education can teach passion. So.
Oh, I'd agree with that 100%. I think that's 100% true. And the eye it takes to hear dialogue and to see things and to be able to build characters. Whether you're talking journalism or fiction, I think a lot of the same structure and elements can be the same. And I think Richard's right about that. I think passion has to be in you.
I agree that it takes passion, but what about discipline? I mean, is that something that you acquire pursuing the education?
Well, because I have absolutely no discipline. Okay, and what I say about that it took me a long time to get into actually finishing the book and that is because it's so easy to not write. It's a difficult thing to sit down and write. I mean, if you just want to do stream of consciousness stuff, but to actually form it, to actually bring it together and make a story out of it, and get the rhythm and everything else, it takes discipline, and you have to. Some days you sit there and it's 12 hours go by and it's done. And some days you sit there and every 5 minutes is torture.
Every 5 minutes is torture.
Yeah, I mean, most people get good at their jobs because they're paid to be there 8 hours a day.
Right.
And if you can, I don't know, to write a book, you have to sit down and actually write and put in that time. And
at the same time. Well, you know what? Let's talk about that a little deeper, but we're going to take a break, okay? Stay tuned. We are going to get into the discipline of writing. We'll be right back.
And now, another adventure with Savings Man.
Oh dear, I can't afford that.
Charge it. You can pay it off later.
Not so fast, credit card guy.
Savings Man.
Don't let him entice you, ma'am. Credit card guy can lead you to big trouble. You need a savings plan.
You're right, Savings Man.
Get this ballpark estimate worksheet at choosetosave.org. It will help you get started.
Gee, thanks, Savings Man.
No, thank you.
So visit choosetosave.org and get your ballpark estimate today.
Thank you for coming back to us. This is The Artist Tree. When we left for commercial, we were discussing passion and discipline. And so kind of the habits of a successful writer, you'd say, is making sure you write every day. And you say doing the 8 hours a day as if it's a real job.
Well, that would be nice if you had 8 hours to spare to do that. I think people get good at their jobs because they have all that time to devote to it, and they get paid to do that. As a writer, it's harder because you're not paid to do that. You're hoping it pays off eventually.
Right.
And as Richard said, it's hard sometimes to sit down, even for 5 minutes. And you'll sit down, and you'll write for 20 minutes, and you'll think this is not working out.
Right.
But it's
when you say it's not working out, do you mean sitting down every day it's not working out? The work itself,
just the
what
words,
you're writing?
the words coming out. You're like, this doesn't make sense. My characters aren't sounding right. But Neil Gaiman, he's written a lot of stuff, and he said he'd have days where nothing sounded right to him, and he'd force himself to keep going. And there are days where things just fly out of you, and you can do 2,000 words in an hour. And then when you go back and look at it, you notice that it's really not that much different. It was your perception on a bad day that it's not going right, but it is.
So you do think that that's important, making sure you get something on the page every day.
Yeah.
The greatest threat to writing, and great writing or even mediocre writing, is time. I mean, it's just a matter of you have to carve out time. If you want to be a writer in any capacity, you have to find the time to do it. And we were talking in the last segment about journalism schools and MFAs and things like that. One thing I did learn, and one thing a professor told me once that stuck with me, 10 years or so later, is writing is something or a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult. And that was a quote that stuck with me and just makes a lot of sense, because if you're a writer, if you care about what you're writing, it's so hard to sit there and craft a good sentence or get the voice that you think this person should say correct. And that applies again, I think, to a lot of times in journalism and fiction. The elements of writing, I think, are the same regardless of medium. What people say, a story arc, narrative, things like that, the structure, those things are all important, I think, regardless of who you're writing for, even if it's yourself.
And you mentioned the elements of writing. Are they the same across the board? You said narrative. Kind of put them out there for people who might be interested in beginning.
I think by definition, elemental writing is the same. I think writing is writing is writing. And I think that it just doesn't matter who you're writing for, or if you're getting paid to do it, or if you're writing for a newspaper. A lot of times, if you're writing for a newspaper or a magazine, there's a structure, there's a box that you have to fit within. That the reason I joined the fiction group is so I can not always have to fit in that box, which is fun. I mean, it's a release for me. But I think in terms of the most important things for me, I think when I read something, and certainly if I try to write something, it's dialogue and story arc. Every word, in my opinion, has to mean something. It has to advance the story. If there's a sentence in there, or certainly a paragraph, that doesn't advance the story and doesn't have a purpose, it needs to go. And that's the journalist in me, I think. And it has served me well. I think
you're used to the
red
ink.
You have to kill your children. You get married to these phrases that you think this is just perfect. But you're right. If it doesn't fit the story, you have to kill your children.
So what are the components of a good piece then?
Well, it has to have like Kent said, even a column has to have an arc to it. In other words, it has to have this beginning and this meaty middle, and then it has to have some sort of a conclusion, some sort of a finish. And it does make a difference if it's work of fiction or a good column. And I think even the sports columns or anything. I keep bringing up Posnanski to Kent because I think he's a hell of a writer. I think he's a very good writer, and but again, he's passionate about what he does.
Right.
And but people that turn out columns daily, I admire these people that are able to do that on a daily basis. Turn out really good quality columns daily.
Well, let's talk fiction. I mean, because that's what we all do. When you think about good fiction, it's good beginning, good end, nice meaty middle, like you said. But what goes in there? I mean, let's talk in terms of plot and characterization. I mean, what does that kind of stuff mean?
Just that, I'd say plot and characters and setting are your three big issues, and great books. The writers can put all those together, and they can all be fantastic, but often I'll read a book and be drawn into it because the setting is so vivid and I feel like I'm right there. Or the characters instead. The setting could be small, but the characters are so big and lifelike and you relate to them. An author will use different ways of doing that. The plot can be fantastic and is twisting and turning and you're riding along with it, but they could be all three of those or one of those three things, and if it's a good fiction, it's because you're drawn in and you don't want to put it down.
I think character development to me excuse me, is the most important thing, because a great character can take even a mediocre plot and make it colorful and interesting. Setting as a character, I think, is important in a lot of novels and movies and TV shows. And that's one thing I think that's important too. Fiction anymore isn't just books. It's not just short stories. I mean, it goes to screenplays, and some of the greatest writing in America, I think, is in television shows these days. I mean, look at The Wire, look at The Shield, 6 Feet Under, things like that. Great TV shows that have just unbelievable characters. I mean, Omar Little from The Wire could stand against a wall and I'd be interested, just because he's such a great character. And so to me, if I'm reading a book, if I'm watching a TV show, reading a short story, the most elemental thing, since we're talking about that, to me, is just seeing a vivid, beautiful character drawn on the page that can take me anywhere.
Yeah, I think you have to be involved and care about the protagonist. If he's somebody that you really don't care about, you don't care about the book.
Wow. So you're saying that you can take kind of a so-so storyline, but if the characters are rich and you can fall in love with them, it might salvage the piece. Is that?
Well, you want to watch this character, transcend either some character flaw, some personality quirk, or something. Because you look at all of the characters in detective novels that the protagonist is an alcoholic or he's got some other flaw that he carries through this book, but he transcends that to get somewhere.
The way I look at it is, great characters can make a mediocre plot really interesting and good. A great plot doesn't necessarily make really good characters. Elmore Leonard is a guy who was just terrific at that. He can take really simple plots, and because his characters are so rich, he can turn these very simple situations into something just really interesting. He's one of my favorite writers because of that.
Yeah.
Well, something that you said, I wanted to clarify. You said that the character might be flawed. So you want to make sure, that as a writer we understand that a good character doesn't mean a perfect person, right?
No, I don't think. You want to be realistic. Yeah, you want to be realistic.
I think the greatest characters are flawed. I think that that helps us to identify with them, because at least I'll speak for myself. I'm pretty flawed, and so if
I'll second that.
But if I read somebody who's pious, I don't want anything to do with that, because for one, I've never met anybody like that, and certainly I don't have any sympathy for somebody who's had it perfect for his or her life. I mean, there's got to be something there, some kind of weakness, because we've all got them, and that helps to identify them. It certainly helps to make them more real.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, drama comes from mistakes. So if your character never makes a mistake, and it's going to be boring.
So it's about good characterization and drama.
Yeah.
Well, you have to have a conflict. You have to have something in there. That's the protagonist is about to lose something. Something in there. He's either in physical danger or something.
Something to fight against.
Something to fight against.
Some threat, I would say. I mean, whether it's something. Literally, a threat against the children being kidnapped or money or whatever, or something maybe in their head. Something proprietary, mental, whatever. I don't know. To me, that something has got to be in danger.
That's what Burroughs did with.
How do you create that conflict? Is it simply having a protagonist with a goal, and then an antagonist to work against it? Is that the best way to create conflict, or?
I think it has to be an outside influence. It doesn't have to be, but I think an outside influence, that kind of blindsides him, that or her, but they can come in. You can have she can be a drug addict or whatever, and have that. It doesn't have to be an outside one.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and take another break, guys. Okay. All right. Stay tuned. Don't go nowhere.
Back off, old man!
Thank you for staying tuned. We are speaking with members of the Fiction Writers Group at the Writers Place. We're going to talk about being in a fiction writers group. How do you get started in something like that?
Google.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of them. I mean, there's a meetup group, the Kansas City Writers Meetup Group, and it's got a lot of members, and it's got some critique groups that are part of that meet separately, and then they have a meeting once a month. The Writers Place sponsors some, and the Writers Place, of course, where I had, when it first started up, I was living fairly close to it, and had gone down there and got to know the people. And I really liked it, just like the whole atmosphere, having a writer's place is for writers. But I think a critique group, I was looking for a critique group because I wanted more eyes on my manuscripts.
Sure.
And because
so
too
there
often,
are different types of writers groups?
Oh yeah. I mean, some of them are genre specific and that. So, but I wanted more eyes on mine. I wanted it edited. And
so that's when you decided to come to the Writer's Place. You can find fiction specific. Is it because it's fiction in general, screenplays, everything?
This one is not. The one that we're part of is not genre specific.
Right.
And so we read across a lot of different genres and that, which makes it more interesting, I think. Because you're reading things that you wouldn't normally. And you're getting critiqued by people that don't normally read your stuff. In other words, I don't normally read in Daniel's genre, but he's pulled me into the story, and if he can pull me into the story, then he's doing a good job.
Okay, and so what is important about being critiqued as a writer? Because I keep hearing you say you needed some eyes on your work. What does that do for?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with if you write something. You really have no idea how good it is or what it needs until somebody else reads it, and hopefully that's a lot of somebody else's. And if it gets to the editing process with a publishing house or whatnot, it may be too late. I mean, if you've got some critical errors in there or mistakes or things that you have to, holes in the story, they're just going to throw it out. I mean, there's a lot of competition for being published, and I don't think you want. That's a pretty big leap of faith, I think, to take. And so it's not easy being criticized. It's certainly not easy having something you've agonized over and you think is terrific, and having really some perfect strangers come in and say this is really bad. That takes some getting used to. Yeah. But I think it's an essential part of being a writer. Again, regardless of what platform you're on. Just because you're going to be critiqued. If you want to do this, and certainly if you want to be paid to do it, you're going to be critiqued.
Right. And better do it when you're in a fiction group than when you're...
Anybody, everybody gets, if it's a good book, whether it's traditionally published or independently published, it needs an editor. I don't care how good a writer you are, whether you're Stephen King or Clancy or whoever you are, you need an editor. Right. Just because what's in your head doesn't always make it to the page, and so you end up with this huge plot hole in there, a flaw, a character that has been developed completely, or in my case, just a lot. Well, I mean, I also do that, but also just a lot of copy editing things,
Right.
and that's a very important.
You both mentioned holes in the plot. Can you, for people who are new to writing, describe what a plot hole might be? Is it like issues with continuity?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, or it can be simple things like you start out the story where somebody's in a 2-story building, and then you have them go to the 3rd story. And just little things that you get so close to the story, and as Richard said, it's in your head, and it's developing in your head, but it might not have made the adjustment on the page. There can be real simple things that you miss.
And anytime you're dealing with just a world of words, I mean, whether it's a short story or a novel, I mean, you're talking about thousands of words, and you're going to mess up a few of them. And whether that means misspell one or two of them, or some things
crazy
just don't
metaphors.
Make sense. Yeah, sure. Things that just don't add up within the story. I mean, everybody's watched a movie at some point and said, "Wait a second, now that doesn't make sense. That's not what he said earlier."
Right.
And that you remember that movie as bad, and you don't want anybody to remember your novel or sports journalism story or short story as bad. If that happens, then you've just absorbed a critical blow.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
So critique is essential to a writer. I'm gonna ask you guys, getting critiqued, what is it really like? I mean, how do you feel? I mean, because I'm gonna say I'm a writer, and I've been in critique groups where writers have been very impassioned when receiving their critiques. Talk about the process, the art of critique.
Well, the two things. One is you can't be personal. okay, this isn't a personal thing. You know, you might like or dislike the person writing, because I've been very hard on you,
Yes,
and I like you,
and I love you.
So, but the idea is to make it as good as possible. You know, in my opinion, you know, what's it going to take to make this piece of writing speak to me? Now, it's going to be something different to Daniel. So when you get several people around the table that point out maybe something, the similar thing or the same thing in the story, then you might want to take a look at that. If it's just one person, well, that's one person one person's eye. That's why I think it's important to have a group, because I know people that have paid good money for editing, you know, before they got published, and the editor wasn't any better, you know, or his job than the writer was.
Right.
And so I think the more people you have to take a look at, the better. But you have to understand that it's not a personal thing. You know, and it's necessary.
Yeah, as a critiquer, I want to be direct, and if I don't understand what's going on with the story, I'm going to say so. But it might just be because I don't understand what's going on in the story. It might be there for everyone else. And so I think a critiquer can make the mistake of saying, well, since I don't understand it, it must be wrong, and really riding somebody about that. But you really have to know that the story is that person's baby, and if they've made a choice, at the end, it's their choice,
so our favorite phrase, we're going to take that under advisement.
Take that under advisement. That's right. Thank you for your advice.
So, does it matter? You mentioned that you don't read in Daniel's genre. Does it matter if somebody's reading your work and that you write sci-fi?
Yeah.
And they don't really read that? Is their critique as valuable?
Well, it's very interesting because like Naomi reads, and you read in my genre a lot, so you'll pick up on stuff that's kind of standard for that genre, and I don't have to explain a lot of it. But Richard and Martin will say this doesn't make sense to me, because they're not used to reading that genre, and I want more people to read my books outside of the genre. I want a bigger market base. So if I can find a way to broaden that up so it's understood by everybody that reads it, whether they're science fiction, fantasy fans or not, then it's important to do. So.
Ooh, you guys are bringing up a good part, is writing for yourself when you're at the keyboard versus writing for an audience. So that's what the critique does. They serve as your first audience.
Sure, exactly. In other words, it's like this book. You know, I use a lot of sailing-specific terms in there, and hopefully it didn't stop the reader from getting involved in the story. You know, so.
Yes, and I have read your book, cover to cover.
You better.
I know. And I don't know anything about sailing. I've never been interested in sailing. I don't even know if I've really been on a boat. But this book was so well written, and the language was so clean. I think that's what you're talking about, is, you know, page turner. And I'm not just saying that because you're my friend, is you're the way you handle language. And so what importance, we talk about characterization and plot and critique, but what importance is language to the writer and the ability to wield it, if you will?
I think it's essential, but I think it's also essential to sometimes get out of the way of it. I think it's way easier to overwrite and, you know, think that you're, you know, the greatest writer of all time and can turn the best phrases ever, and you'll just that's a big bear trap. I mean,
I don't know. I feel like he's talking about me.
But I mean, that's a good way to undermine what would be the shell of a great story. I think. I mean, if you shouldn't use 30 words when 10 will do. I mean, even if they're 30 beautiful words. You know, that can bog down the reader, and that's a big threat, I think, to a reader, is if they get bored, or if they're just like, what is she talking about? Then you have to simplify that. You know, that can be an issue.
Yeah, some of the first stories I brought to the group, I realized I was over-describing things. I was trying to describe around what I was talking about. Right. So you could see it, but I wasn't saying what it was. I wasn't putting it on the page. I'd take all that over-description out.
Ooh, another one of our favorite phrases, put it on the page.
Well, you have to give the reader some credit also. In other words, you don't have to, if he leaves to go to the store, you don't have to describe every step out the door, you know, to get in the car.
All right, guys, we got to wrap up part one of this writers group session. I am having a blast. Okay, thank you guys for joining us at the Artist Tree, and we'll see you next time.